Welcome, Instagram family. We're back with the Instagram live series, Sensual Sovereignty, Burn the Box. And today I have my guest, Azaria Menezes, also known as the Pussy Fairy. So I'm going to just give a little introduction and then hopefully can get her on for this conversation. So, Azaria, also known as the Pussy Fairy, is a trauma-informed sex and intimacy coach that works with women, moms, and couples to figure out what that thing is that's holding them back in the bedroom. She supports folks to find back to feeling turned on, ecstatic, and orgasmic in and out of the bedroom. Azaria supports her clients to reignite that spark back into their sexuality, their sensuality, or relationships so that they can have the capacity to fall more in love with themselves and or each other. She also hosts the podcast Getting Intimate, where she brings practical ways to invite more pleasure into your body, relationships, and sex life. So please join me with Azaria. Yes. So we get her on. So excited for this conversation. This has been a little while coming. Hello! Yay! So good to see you.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad to be here. So excited. Oh
Yes.
thank you for that beautiful and wonderful introduction, by the way.
Oh, it's such a juicy introduction. And I was just thinking, like, it's really been a little while coming now to have this conversation. I've reached out, we're like talking about it, and finally.
I know, right? When the timing is right, it's right. And sometimes it's like, you just have to wait until that like juicy moment. And then everything just falls into place and it works and it feels good. And I'm so, so excited to be here. So thank you so much for hosting me and having me in our conversation around pleasure.
Yes. Oh, I wasn't able to do it. I was trying to I try to plan ahead and wanted to pin something in the comments, but you know what? We'll just let it be.
That's okay. It's all like trial and error when it comes to these things with like IG lives. It's such a learning curve. That's like one thing where I'm still trying to find a lot of pleasure in.
I know. And every time I get this, I have nervousness, nervous, excited kind of energy. Because I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? And is it going to work? And
yeah, it's always like that moment before, right? But then like when it happens, you're just like, this is so good. And usually if anything happens, like you can just hop off and hop back on again. So
right.
I think we just really like to get off on like the what if.
It really is the unknown, right? It really is like a stepping into unknown, uncertainty, and there's a lot of charge there, you know.
Yeah.
I love it. And I can also, I know that I want to say a year ago, probably even just a few months ago, if you've been like, oh, you're going to be doing these conversations, you're going to go live and you're going to invite people into some kind of conversation, it would have freaked me out. So
look at you now.
I'm like, okay, it's happening. You know?
Yeah, it's just like getting into like our practice and our routine about it, right? I think like with anything, it can feel like the unknown, even just talking about pleasure, right? The unknown of stepping into pleasure can feel so overwhelming sometimes to just think about like the idea of like, whoa, right? Anything unknown is like, okay, what's going to happen? And the more we just remember that it's like about those small baby steps and just to keep showing up and to keep practicing holding that like nervous slash excited slash anticipation energy,
Yes.
the more we just like fall into understanding that like, yeah, I do have the capacity to do this.
Yes. Yes, we really do start to expand, and that's like part of what this whole series was about or has been about is this idea of sensual sovereignty. So I'll say it again, just for anyone who hasn't heard, that I describe it as embodied love, liberation, and the license to expand the expression of our true essence. And it's also turned into this burn the box, because like we expand and we can we don't need the boxes. We can move into some other space. Maybe it's another box, but we can explore that for a while. And I love that you jumped right in. You mentioned pleasure, because of course that's very much what you do. But that's also before I was even doing this series. I think I had reached out in our conversation, or you had reached out to me, whatever it was. We were in a conversation in a IG DM conversation about your work, because it has been really it has been and is really inspiring to me to witness you just being in the space of pleasure, talking so openly about pleasure, inviting anyone who's following you to explore their own pleasure, explore their own boundaries. It's just like lean into all of this, which for me has been a challenge. It's not something I'm stepping fully into. Maybe one day. This is what I'm hoping, but I have layers upon layers of resistance around just showing up in it. So that's my stuff, but I really want to hear more about anything that's inspiring you about what we're talking about, and also I suppose if there's when it comes to expansion, when it comes to expanding our essence, like really broadening it so we can explore more, so we can be more, so we can show up as more for ourselves, for partners, for whoever's in our life. Like if there's something around that's been part of your journey, or that was really integral for you.
Yes. Ooh, this is like a huge loaded question. Like, where do we start? Gonna
I
be two
purposely
hours
I
or
go
what?
way big, go way big, and then we just see where where it lands.
Exactly. Oh, pleasure and expansion. And yeah, I think the journey in this for me personally is really just exploring what pleasure means for me, because I think there is an invitation for pleasure to be something different for everyone, right? The way in which we enjoy things, the way in which we experience things, the way we see the world is so unique to us. But there is like one common factor, which is like, what is the thing that like really excites us? Like, what is that thing that like pulls us in and feels like super delicious and is more of an invitation? And in that is where we can find our authentic and unique expansion of what pleasure is, right? And for me, it's more of like, I love like the sensual, like the beautiful, like anything that feels luxurious, like any bougie bitch energy. Like,
Yeah.
that is what gives me so much pleasure. And so in exploring what that looks like for me in terms of, okay, so what are the things that feel luxurious? What are like the fabrics? I'm wearing like a very like velvety shirt right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like one of the ways like I choose the things that make me feel really good in my pleasure journey. So like the expansion is just finding more things to add in your life that do inspire that pleasure for you in whatever way that looks like for you. And so the more you step into the being, right, of just letting yourself be pulled by the things that like magnetize you and pull you in, and the more you allow yourself to be like charged by all of these things, then you just get to like see it as a game and as more of like an energy thing, right? So I think in my journey is like when I share the pleasure expansion with clients and people in my life or even in my relationship, there's an understanding that pleasure looks different for everyone. And it's really just about finding what is that thing that is really like pulling me in? What is that thing that is like awakening something in my body? What makes me feel alive? What makes me feel like vibrant, right? All of these things. So,
Oh, yes, I love that. And so it can be, I love that it can be something simple, but really potent, like just the touch of a fabric or something in the environment, of a flower, like something alive or anything that can be the start of more expansion into pleasure.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's a lot of the times we think that pleasure has to mean something, like pleasure expansion has to mean something really big. It has to be orgasmic. It has to be like fully immersed. It has to be like fully realized. And that can feel really overwhelming. Like, right? If we think about what does this mean in my life and how can I expand it into the people in my life? And maybe we're seeing someone just fully indulging in their pleasure, and it must mean that we have to make it look like that. But in reality, it's like all of those small ways that really support us to feel pleasure are really the things that are going to magnetize and expand our capacity to hold more pleasure in our life. And then just like let others be inspired by our own unique blueprint of pleasure.
Oh, yes. Oh, I love that. The own unique blueprint of pleasure. Because I
Yeah.
was just thinking as you were sharing that pleasure can also become a box, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it has to look a certain way. And,
Yeah.
we get so many messages, advertising, whatever. Like we get a lot of messages and also like conditioning of like, well, this is what pleasure is. This is what it
Yeah.
looks like. This is what like orgasm looks like. This is what, all of this is when it's not, it's so different for each person, right? It's like
So different.
finding their own way in.
So I'm curious for you, like what is like your version of pleasure?
um, oh, I am very into like what you were sharing before about the velvet you're wearing, like I'm very into the sensual aspects.
Mm,
And so, smells and like I like, like floral, like jasmine or like
yes.
soft, very like soft, kind of luxurious fabrics. For me.
Okay, we're kind of the same cloth here.
I know. Like, you were talking, I'm like, oh yeah.
I mean, the word sensual sovereignty is already like, yes, it can
Oh,
be
yeah.
so, so much. It's really about like how do we awaken our senses? Like, and what are the things that activate our senses for us, right? Because when we activate our senses, it number one brings us fully back into the present moment in
Mhm.
whatever way, right? And when we're in the present moment, it really awakens like the experience of being, right? And that's the
Mhm.
core of
Yeah.
coming back to your authenticity and expanding your capacity to feel more pleasure and to invite more pleasure is actually it's in the being and not the doing.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yes, I think I know sometimes even with our teacher Layla, as she talks about things like she doesn't really like, from what I've heard of her, like masculine, feminine, like using these kind
Mm.
of things, but I do think there's a place for it. Like I feel like the being and the, just like surrender and that allowing is so much of this kind of feminine energy or divine feminine or,
Mm.
how how you can think about that. And I do think masculine, there's a place for that as well, but um, there's something that, that's just called to me in this work too, of just how do we really drop into the being, just the
Yes.
surrender of it,
With a whole world that is busy in the doing. And like even myself, I get caught up in the doing, right? And it's that's when things just start feeling really hard. And that's when they start feeling just very, there's a different like pressure to it, right? And so when we allow ourselves to receive and when we allow ourselves to open and when we allow ourselves to like, ooh, surrender, right? And just like receive everything. That's usually when like the creativity and the juice and the pleasure and all of those things drop in, right? And it's about finding that balance of like, okay, when our body knows, our body, it's not even about finding the balance. It's about listening to when our body is telling us that's enough doing. Let's get into the being. And it's the mind that's usually like, oh, but I feel like the doing hasn't been enough. So we can't possibly be in the being because there needs to be some sort of like achievement until we can rest in the being, or
Yeah.
maybe we haven't done enough of the doing to feel deserving or worthy of the being, right? All of these
Yeah.
stories that can come up that can make the being so hard when it's so easy. Like the doing should be the harder thing.
Yes. Yeah, and it goes back a little what we were talking about earlier about that space of the unknown and the uncertainty and the like all of that is, I feel like, in the being.
Yes.
Let
100.
go, right? Whereas the doing brings some kind of certainty. It allows us to have some control. So we think, like, okay, I'm
So
gonna
we think, yeah.
I know. It masquerades as such.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah.
and it's really like that. It's almost like a little bit of a like a safety net because it does
Mhm.
feel sometimes the the doing is something that offers a little bit more of a reward or like a tick off of our to-do list or like a little dopamine hit. And
Yes.
in a world where things like that are plentiful, and that's how the world is kind of built, the society, right?
Yes.
It is in the relaxing and the surrendering and the letting go that there is that unknown and
Mhm.
we're almost in a state of receiving and within
Mhm.
that, right? Where's the like to do, where's the like checklist, where are all these things, where's that like that allure, right? But it's when we truly learn to surrender to what's coming up. That's where the honey is. Like that is the magic. Same thing with sex, right? When it comes to sex, so much of fully experiencing like the sex that you truly desire, your version of whatever that looks like, whether you want it to be like
Mhm.
wild and free or like just fully connected and deeply like
Mhm.
spiritual or even just so dropped into your own body, your own senses, your own pleasure, right? So much of that is when we find those moments, right? And it doesn't have to be like the whole thing, but when we find those moments, it's 99% of the time because we're so present in our bodies and we're in the being, we're in the receiving, we're in the surrendering, right? And it's a
Mhm.
practice. It's something that we really get to cultivate because being is not it's not a doing attitude where we have to just like do the things and it's going to happen, but it's more of like something that we get to slowly build upon and it slowly expands and it's a very like slow expansion, this being. And
Mhm.
when we keep coming back to it and keep floating out of it and keep coming back to it, right? And I think that
Mhm.
sometimes that's where we really lose our patience with it. It's happening a little bit slower and it's that slower pace, but I think that's the whole lesson in it, right? Is
Yeah, absolutely.
it's the slowness.
Yes. Yes, the slowness and also observing the pressure,
Mm,
expectation, like these ways that we measure doing,
yeah.
we're conditioned into so much doing and achieving and
Mm.
expectation, like I said, like all of that, like all of that has, there's an invitation for that to just release, like, and I'm not saying that happens easily, but it's kind of like, can we just let all of that go? There's so much more to
Mm.
experience, by releasing that. And it's like, oh, maybe there's nothing to expect. Maybe there's not any kind of benchmark, or, we're not checking things off. We're not creating a lot of pressure for some certain thing. We're actually just letting go into
Mm.
that kind of unknown again, that.
It's almost like that, like being is the underlying thing of everything, right? It's like, how can we be more in the being when we're doing things, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when we're doing things, as you said, which I love that you brought up, for like a goal-oriented reason, or like we're putting pressure on us for it to look a certain way, right? It's like we feel like we have the control so much when we're doing, because we're expecting that control to be there, and we're almost like
Mm-hmm.
putting all of those controls into place, whether it's subconscious or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
To reaffirm the feeling of, oh, the doing feels good because I'm in control. Right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that. And I mean, what would it look like to really define what it means to do? And when we step into the the pleasure and the joy, right? And that, like, I'm doing this because I truly want to, and it feels really good and very exciting, right?
Yeah.
That's the difference between when we're doing something in full pleasure, or when we're just doing it because we have to, or we should, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's our job, or like whatever, right? And that's
Right.
where it can feel like very disconnected, and it can
Mm-hmm.
start to get like very like the opposite. Like my pussy is dry, the Sahara Desert is happening in there. Like, it's not giving the vibes.
The whole mood is gone. It's just
Gone. And it's the same thing with sex, right? Like there's so
Mm-hmm.
many comparisons that we can make here. I mean, like, take
Mm-hmm.
everything in your sex life and apply it to what's happening in your real life. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there is a mirror.
Yeah, right. It's almost like the deepest reflection of what is happening in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Like micro versus macro
Yeah.
all the time, all the time.
Um, I wonder, and I will share a bit that I've already shared with you previously. But for me, I know as like I don't even know where to start, but it's been like such a journey of even going into. I mean, if you told me like 5 years ago, like, or maybe it was 5 years ago at this point. Anyway, 5, 6 years ago, if you said like you're going to be doing sexuality work, I would just be like, you're absolutely out of your mind. Like that is not on my in my sphere of like. Well, I was in this like healing mode, and I was then trying to look at other ways of healing, which is like the whole path had been about healing, which this is as we look at sexuality for sure. But then I started doing it, and then I was like getting more comfortable, and I was, of course, learning all these things that we're talking about, or probably unlearning more than learning, to just kind of like, oh yeah, be in the moment and in my body and all of this. And then when I finally finished, and I've been in the entrepreneurial world, like with my
Mm,
business and trying to put work out there, I realize, I mean, it's very clear, but like I kind of put all of this aside, and I started focusing on things that felt more comfortable to me, right? Like for me, it was like, okay, my business is I am sacred ground. Like it was like, okay, the sacredness and there's overlap. There's overlap in it all, but I wasn't going there. I just wasn't going there. And then I've realized, this is part of what the conversation we've had separately, is just that, gosh, it's hard for me. It's hard. I've realized like I know a lot of these things and it feels so good, and I know how important pleasure is. I know how important like connecting to sexuality is, connecting to that energy, connecting to that, like, our juice, our, like, vitality that had been for me very repressed for most of my life. And yet it's like I have been and am hitting layers of resistance, because suddenly it's like, oh, suddenly it's like, well, this is okay to talk about and this isn't, or this is,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is safer, I'll stay over here in this world or this whatever realm of things. And, and then at the same time, I'm working in this membership program that is part of our teacher, Layla Martin. And in there, I'm like pretty comfortable to go into all these places. So it's like, I know I can, but I know
Mm.
it's my own internal, there's just like so many layers there that are like,
Yeah.
that's scary. Just don't. Don't do that. So I witness you, you inspire me, I see what you're putting out there, and I just wonder if that has been any part of your journey, like something you had to work through, or if that just felt natural to really
Mm.
step into this, like
Yeah.
the pussy fairy, world.
I love this question, and I love that reflection because it shows so much. Like we tend to like do what just feels easy because we all have different things that can feel a little bit hard. And like, of
Mhm.
course, our brain can make up all of these resistance things
Yes.
that are like, ooh, like, I don't know if I want to go there because of that. Like, the stories, like,
Mhm.
wow. Our brains are
Right.
incredible story crafters. And I also love that you share that there is that knowing that like I have this in me. Like there is a place where it does feel good to
Yes.
share this part of myself and to be in it and to lead from this place.
Mhm.
And I think that I really relate to you in that way with
Mhm.
a completely opposite side of myself. So when it comes
Yeah.
to my spirituality and my yeah, just like my connection to the sacred and to spirit and to soul, right? That is something that I just, oh, I love seeing you just live it and speak it and be it, and with so much ease. And it's just so beautiful to witness even in your voice when you share. It's
Mhm.
incredibly inspiring, and I'm like, wow, there's parts of the thing that I'm longing so deeply
Mhm.
to bring out into the world and to see and to
Mhm.
let that be seen is what I see in
Mhm.
you. And I think there's always those little opportunities for us to witness, like, oh, what is that thing inside of me that's really calling to come up? And what is that thing that's really just like craving to be seen? And
Yes.
when it comes to sexuality and pleasure for me, it's something that I've always found so much ease from when I was young all the way up until now. I was just recently, I told you, like I recently found my childhood diaries. It is like a Wikipedia for sex. I was like, oh my goodness. Like I even had like little condoms like stuck in and was drawing like anatomy and was just drawing about puberty and the body. I was like 8. I don't even know where I got that from. What is going on? I've always been so curious about it. And so it's been something that has been really easy for me to lead
Mhm.
from. Now, as a child and when you're young, it's very complicated, that relationship. And so I struggled a lot in finding ways to express myself. And I think that now as an adult and just understanding sexuality from a different lens, it's just been so freeing to just finally be able to live my truth and just speak in the way that feels easy for me. And also, I know that's not where my my like that like that thing lies. That's hard to connect with and to transmute. And I think that when we connect both things, that's like when we really drop into like that magic and juice. And
Mhm.
so it's a
Mhm.
journey, and I
Mhm.
absolutely I absolutely resonate with what you were sharing, even if it looks different from me, because it's like
Mhm.
we have the exact things that we see in each other that's like, oh,
Right.
so incredible. Like I'm in awe.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And just, yeah, I can just to know that there is this mutual appreciation and um, an understanding and awareness, and how we can see in someone else like, oh gosh, I wish I could go into that space. You know, it's like, I feel it very encouraging, you know, because I think, as you said, and as we've been talking about what's known and what's unknown, there is this like beauty and magic that's in the what's kind of unknown or unexplored in this case, you know, just like unexpressed, you know,
Mm.
is like, I know from myself, like this resistance I have is, it's huge. And it's also like, this is part of this path that I'm on of like,
Mm.
okay, can I lean into that a little bit more? Can I try to, well, of course it will start with me and my own body, my own experience, but then
Mm.
what do I want to offer? What do I want to hold space for, you know, in other people? And as much as it gets frustrating, sometimes it just like, because it just feels like it does kind of feel like this invisible wall or something, like I can't, you know, quite.
I guess the curiosity is like, what are we making that wall? I think, right? It's like all of our expectations of what we think we should be and we should be doing and what that looks like. And when the question really is like, it's sometimes with those things, it's not even like our job to know the how and the when, but it's just like showing up. I'm here and I'm here for the now, right? And ooh, that invisible wall though, like it's a big one.
It's a big one. Yes.
It's like one of those things, like it's an invisible wall, but we're here trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I climb it? How do I get around it? Like, how tall is it? Like, what are the things I'm going to need to do to like get through it? But we just said it's an invisible wall.
Therein lies the problem. Yeah. It's like, what do we do with
uh,
it?
oh my goodness. And there's so much truth within that, right? And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that the more we lean into what does this look like for me right now in
Hmm.
this moment? Like, what can pleasure and showing up in this way look like for me in the
Hmm.
next small step rather than like, okay, what programs are like what, you know what I mean? It
Hmm.
can just make it feel so much more digestible when we just take things in like bite size portions because like
Yeah.
the bigness that's like the unknown. That's like the
Yes.
edginess of it. And it's like, whoa, what am I going to step into? What if I can't close Pandora's box? Like, what if it's like this? What if it's the wrong place or path? There's so many questions, right? And
I know.
when yeah, it's interesting how we navigate like the unknown, where it's really like we're gonna
Hmm.
take one little step at a time, just like we're moving in the dark. I don't
Yeah.
know anyone else who like is in a dark room and they just like book it, like they just run through. I feel like that's not a thing. Like maybe, but for anyone out there who does, like kudos to you. But for me, for maybe the majority of people out there, like we walk slowly and we're expanding and exploring what it
Yeah.
is, right? And that's how like your eyesight even adjusts slowly, right? And it's
Hmm.
one of those things that we, ooh, like what if that got to like what if we knew that unknown? had the
Mm-hmm.
capacity to hold us
Mm-hmm.
in whatever that looks like, right? And we get to
Mm-hmm.
change and we get to choose differently and we get to make it what we want, right?
Yes.
Mm.
Oh, I really love that analogy. That's so good because I mean, that's just a sheer safety issue to not run, right, in like a dark room or whatever. Just like, okay, no,
Totally. And the thing is, the room is not anyone else's. It's
right,
your room. You're familiar with the spaces. You
right,
know everything about the space. But now the lights are off and
yeah.
the panic hits and you're like, "Oh my gosh." And that's the unknown of that can be
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming, but really
Mm-hmm.
like we know our space in the body. We know
Mm-hmm.
our space in the way that we move and speak in the world. We know our desires. We know what feels good and what gets us excited, right? And
Yeah.
so we know the space so intimately, and we're the only
Mm-hmm.
ones probably that know the space so intimately. So it's quite fascinating, this topic.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Oh, what's coming to me is about like just for me just like unpacking a little of this resistance, and it really helps. What you shared so helps, I think, for me and for anyone else wanting to explore pleasure of just like imagining the dark room, like just taking a little step, just exploring, just being curious, and just taking it slow, and allowing, like you said, the eyesight to adjust so that you can see things more clearly, like all of that. um I know for me there's been this aspect of like what's acceptable or not, or that's the word that's coming to me. Yeah, I think it is that. This is the word really about like what's acceptable, what's not. And so as I have been on this path, like for me, I didn't really, just my closer friends really knew that I was doing this sexuality coaching. Otherwise, I just said coaching. I'm doing a good coaching program, like I just, didn't really say. And then later, it was like, okay, putting the work out there, putting something out there. And it was like, sensuality felt, even though for many people that's pretty equivalent to sexuality, but there is something that that felt more acceptable a
Yeah.
little bit, because it was a little bit like, okay, got the senses in the body, and then like all these things. And so yeah, I just know that was coming up as we're talking, like there's something about that where it's like, for me, it's felt really natural to be in this like spiritual aspect and spirit and sensual and body and all of this, but then to actually get into more like pleasure, like we're going to talk about pleasure more, and like what is that about, and and sex and sexuality, like I just, that's where it kind of hits this for me, like okay, now that's not as, acceptable. Again, these are my own constructs. These are like bringing, this is from my experiences of conditioning and of, for what, like what's right or wrong, or what's a yes, what's a no kind of thing, which we each have in a very individual ways, I think. Yeah, but I wonder if anything in that resonates for you with what you shared, or like maybe it's not about acceptable. Maybe it's something else,
Okay. Some ideas around this. I think that when we're expanding our intimacy edges in whatever way that looks like, right? If it's like a visibility edge, or it's like we're gonna expand into beyond acceptable, like into pleasure, right? And when
Right.
we're looking at expanding our intimacy edges within ourselves, not even like towards the world, but it's something that happens so internal, right? It's like, what is acceptable in this moment for you right now, because like coming back to like, okay, this is present moment, this is how I'm showing up in this. Acceptable is coming up for me, like that's a thing. Like what is acceptable and feels really like still regulated enough to expand into that intimacy edge, right? I think sometimes it's like, ooh, we get into thinking about like sex and pleasure, and now you're like, okay, I guess tomorrow I have to wake up talking about BDSM. Like, this is who I'm gonna have to be now. Like, right?
The mind does go there.
It does. It totally
It's just like, yeah, okay, now you're sex. I don't know.
like now I have to wave my crystal dildo around all over Instagram, and like, ooh, like that is not accept. Like, if your body is like, this is not acceptable. Like, we're not doing this today. This is not where we want to go.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, what feels good and safe enough for me to like expand those intimacy edges within and outside of, right? And the next step beyond acceptable. And I think that so much of that is, again, like taking those small steps into pleasure and really coming back to, oh, like what are the layers underneath of that, right? So much of the time, even as BIPOC, there are so many layers that come with that, like cultural, like it's cake on cake on cake. Like we're doing like, it's, right? And
Yes.
finding like a regulated part of your body and finding that safer space within that expansion, I think is really incredibly important, and doing it in a way that feels good to you and is first and foremost really, really personal. And coming from a place of like, ooh, how can I get into my pleasure of like what feels safe and beyond acceptable, and then from that place share that with the world, rather than like I have to face the world with this and I have to be fully seen in my process. But it's like, how do I play in this process in a way that feels safe and regulated behind the scenes, and then share from that place, right?
Yes. Oh,
does that feel
gorgeous? Yeah, that feels amazing.
Taking some of that medicine for myself.
Oh, it feels so good because it just brings it all. It just brings it all back. It brings it back to my own body, or our, anyone's body, like what our own experiences and our own, like being really discerning and choosing like what feels good to lean into, to explore, and then any sharing that happens from there. Like what's coming to me is that kind of sharing is coming from a very integrated kind of place, right? Like we have done our own work around and we're like leaning into, and then from there we can share. And I'm talking about this us and business that we're in, but I mean this could be in a relationship, right? Or just like what do we choose to lean into, and how do we share that with someone?
And the energy and like like whatever like magnetism or anything that we're transmuting from that place is palpable. It doesn't even have to be the thing that you actually set out to share or speak about.
Yeah.
But because, as you said, there's like integration, and there's like, oh, we're speaking from a place of feeling and being, rather, right? Then it comes out as that energy, and then you're going to be received with like, ooh, okay. And it almost like makes the outside feel safer because you are regulated from that place. Right? Yeah. And also takes the pressure away of like having to share your experience, right? Like you get to choose what it is that you share and in what way, and knowing that whatever way you're doing it with, if you're coming from that place of pleasure or whatever it is that you're currently growing your intimacy edges beyond, is like, ooh, yeah, that's the spot.
Oh, so good. So good. Azaria, thank you. It's what was also coming to me is when we can do it that way, we take away any charge from what anyone out there, whether it's a partner, if it's just this is an intimacy situation, or if it's like sharing work out there, we take away like that kind of charge because people can have their own response. But if it's already something that we've leaned into and integrated, it's like it's okay. We're as long as we're okay with it. You
Yeah.
know, it really takes away from what people might say. Because I think that's what comes up for me a lot too is and this just comes with visibility in general, which has been like a very much ongoing process.
Always
Where
ongoing, and there's more edges to like, why? Why is there more levels?
I know that just like, oh, it's constantly unfolding. But what I realize one of the things that has held me back even thus far and being more visible is because I don't think that I can hold like negative comments or, like any kind of this like disapproval or like that kind of thing, which is just inherent to visibility, but it's kept me smaller because then it's like I can feel like I can control more of that
Like
there.
more of anything that comes back.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, I mean, we can talk about like regulating all of those things all day long, but the reality of it, like, that shit is hard. It is hard to
Yeah.
deal with, anything like that on the internet or anywhere, especially on the internet.
Mhm.
I feel like there's just more, like, there's less accountability, and it's just like you can just type whatever you want. And so I think that it's absolutely 100% valid.
Mhm.
And I think we have to really normalize that that's a thing. And I think that the more the more reach and the more people out there, like the more probability of things like that are coming up, right? And when especially when we come from a place of people pleasing or coming from a place of like, ooh, like, okay, I have to do this thing and it has to look a certain way and I have to control myself a certain way, or I should do this, or this is what I want to, but it doesn't feel quite right yet, but I'm really like going into it to give the people what they want, right? I think that's where it feels even harder to navigate the
Yeah.
like, rather than when you're coming from a place of, like today, this was my experience and I had so much pleasure in it. And like, this is just what I'm sharing from that place. It's like,
Yes.
okay, you don't like it? That's fine.
I know, right?
Right? And it's not coming from like from like an expectation, or even this place of it's for everyone. This is for me, and I'm sharing from that overflow of like, yes, this is what I enjoy, this is what I love. And when we're coming from a place of that, there's so many incredible people, like for that one person, right, that are going to be there and just like, oh, bathe in
Yeah.
your essence. And even if it's something like pleasure, right, and you're coming from this place, folks are just gonna like attribute like those words that you're like, ooh, like I didn't know that was like juicy, or like I didn't know that was like full of pleasure, like I wouldn't think about it, but that's what came out, right? And that's the beautiful thing about, yeah, really connecting to this like deeply personal, integrated space when it comes to, especially when it comes to the things that feel really hard. We have to do it in doses that feel good for us so that we can share from that place. It's like a titration almost, right? Like we're not
Yes.
leaning into that place. It's little by little.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it feels so soothing and so good to like just drop into that space of like, okay, we get to decide, we get to choose, we get to share what feels good, what we integrated, what is like our come from is like from pleasure, from enjoyment,
Mm.
from, you know, all of that. It just feels so good. Um, yeah. I was gonna say like the visibility, just going back to the visibility idea again, because as you mentioned, like as BIPOC, there's a lot there.
Mm.
And as we grow in visibility, and if we're going to talk about things that are more sensitive
Mm-hmm.
to us personally, or maybe it's then also sensitive to a lot of the collective as well, it's just as there is a, what was coming to me is like there could be a charge, a response that comes from other BIPOC.
Mm.
And then there can be also be um, this is how it's just coming to me. I'm just gonna say it, but like from non-BIPOC, I suppose, like a sexualization or like an objectification, you know,
Yes. Yeah, even like fetishization. Yes.
sexualization.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, we're like,
I know. It's like, and I also, as I say it, I know that it's part of the visibility. It's part of like us being able to speak from that space of something that we are leaning into, that does feel pleasurable, that does feel really yummy and juicy and all of that, and know that there will be people who resonate with that, who that's like they're just drawn to, like magnetizes. And at the same time, then there's these like outliers of the
yeah.
stuff that, you know, I would be a no to. Like,
Yeah, 100%. And we get to be a no to it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, like it's something that, of course, if you're on the internet, there we can't control like who's really truly watching or
Mhm.
whatever, and we can't control like what they think or all of the things that could come up, even the biases they have, and all of those things, right? But
Yeah.
the only thing that we can control is to show up, not even control because like we can't even control that, which brings me back to nothing. But the only thing that we can do, okay, I'm trying to like make it just sound a little sweet because there is sweetness with this. The
Right.
only thing that we can do is uh, show up as regulated as we can, and also do the work in continuing to regulate ourselves and really get comfortable setting badass, ruthless, authentic boundaries. Like, ooh. And it can even feel hard setting those sometimes, right, with yourself. It's an intimacy edge that you also get to expand, right? All of these things are like little edges that we just get to keep expanding. And when
Yeah.
our body is like a full like, no, I'm not accepting this.
Right.
This doesn't feel good. This feels murky, right? Like
Mhm.
this is it's not like even if you don't want to get into, I just delete it. Like I don't want to get into it. It's you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
just a gone.
It's gone.
I
Wow.
don't have to explain myself or it's just gone. And I think sometimes as BIPOC, I don't know about you, but like sometimes there is this like urge or need to want to explain, but then the energy of like, like
Yeah.
thinking about doing that is
Yeah.
extremely
Uh,
exhausting and so unnecessary. So it's,
yeah.
yeah, we have to figure out like where where we can set our own boundaries, whether that's energetic, like physical, emotional, right?
Mhm.
To maintain our well-being and our
Mhm.
health, right, within
Mhm.
that space, and also claiming those boundaries of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable is like that's a big thing to step into, right? But we get to step into it in small ways.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like really just like tincture. Think like tincture concentrations, like very small but potent.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And I love that the just that clear having the clear boundaries. So it helps for us to know that we have that. Well, let me just say for myself. It's helpful for me to think about that. Like if I'm going to share something more vulnerable that I'm leaning into that does feel
Mm,
really potent and juicy and all these things, but is an edge, then it
Mm-hmm.
helps to think about, because it is kind of hard because the social media is just like suddenly the world has access,
Yes, suddenly.
like it's not like we just, like if you're public and you just say something or just, it's kind of out there, but
Yeah.
we can, and both energetically and then actual,
Mm.
physically, like create some boundaries. So just, yeah, just deleting, just not
Yeah.
even putting any energy into anything that's not going to be worth our energy.
Mhm.
Deleting, blocking, that we can kind of keep the space more safe for us.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. What I love is even just the idea of this is just like a logistical thing, but like creating like a little group or like favorites where you can like start to share, like, oh, I know there is going to be like some peeps in here that are going to receive this, and I get to like play in this exploration, and we get to like expand from that place, right? Until it
Yeah.
feels okay, we're ready to move bigger and move like more boldly, right? In a way that feels good for us. And
Yes.
there's so much that we can do in terms of creating that space. And I think that when it comes to like control or safety, like there's a place and there's a juicy time for those things, right?
Mhm.
It's and when the time is for those things, it's like when we're like figuring out that like regulation in our nervous systems, right? It's
Mhm.
almost like the juiciest self-care that you can give yourself in that moment is like, how do we regulate and expand that window? Mm,
Oh, that feels so good. And that
yeah,
really does apply. I know I've been talking about showing up, social media, business kind of thing, but that is so true of intimate relationship, right? Like how we
absolutely.
lean into that,
Mm,
share, create space and safety and
yeah.
have boundaries and
Right? It's, I mean, really, it's again coming back to that reflection of like how much spaciousness can we create and for this to feel really good. And yeah, I
Mhm.
love that you brought it back full circle into relationships and intimacy. And right, like we get to build, we get to cultivate like the relationship that we have with it. And there are like ups and downs in a relationship, and there are moments where we're like on a high, and there are moments where we're like, ooh, is this really gonna like is this right? And I think that especially in the visibility edge, right? It's very similar to intimacy in our relationships. Our core, right? Like that core thing is like this being seen, right? Because there's so much connected. Whether it's being seen in your pleasure, right? There's so much that we can hold back in the bedroom of like, whoa, I don't really want to be seen in my full pleasure. Like there's stuff around it, right? Or I don't want to be seen on the internet all over the world sharing about my pleasure or even just generally being seen. I don't want to be seen in a relationship to open my heart, right? There's so much tenderness. And when there's tenderness, when there's a little bit of like risk, when there's a little bit of like, ooh, like I'm putting myself here,
Yeah.
that's when it can feel edgy for us to step into
Yeah.
these edges and these like intimacy edges, right?
Mhm.
Mm,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Mm. Oh, thank you so much, Azaria. I just love this conversation had the word like undulating, like it just was waves of all the yummy words are coming out in this
It
conversation.
really is
Just
like, ooh.
different levels, right? Different levels of pleasure and the macro and the micro, like you're saying,
Mm,
and just like coming back to that in the end too. It's like, yes, we can start close to us
mm.
and then expand how we want. I wonder if there's anything that we haven't talked about or something that wants to be shared. And I do want to hear, of course, about how everyone can reach you in your work, but before
Sure, sure. I think we covered so much. Like, I didn't know how this conversation was going to go today, like which way it was going to go, but it went so many ways. And I love that there's so much synchronicity
Hmm.
in between all of these things and within pleasure and within what it looks like to move through those edges, right? In whatever
Hmm.
way that applies. And it just
Hmm.
goes to show that there is so much value in just coming home to your body and coming home to like figuring out and getting really curious about what it is that sparks that thing for you.
Hmm.
And if it feels edgy, how can
Hmm.
you approach it in like the most regulated way? And
Hmm.
also then expand from that. Like the expansion and expanding, right? Like that expansiveness outside of your box
Yes.
can be something like really gradual and juicy. And like, I think when we think expansion, it always happens like super fast. But with some things, it's actually even more beautiful and even more incredible to just do them slowly so that we can
Hmm.
actually hold beyond that expansion and it can actually feel really, really, really yummy in the body and in our experience. And we know how to regulate.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
Thank you
I
so much
really.
for having me on here. Ooh,
Oh, someone's commenting here.
yeah. Oh, sending you so much love. You can rewatch the juicy parts.
Yes, exactly. All the cues. I love this, like that has just been a theme throughout of like slowness
Mm,
and just going in a little, into our pleasure, into whatever we're wanting to lean into. It's just like dropping into the being, like all of that is so good. I just can really savor it.
yeah, yeah. And a side note on this for anyone
Mhm.
watching that's like, oh my God, is this bitch like this like all the time? Like, no, I'm not. Just like for a real, like real life thing, but this is what grounds me and this is what I choose to intentionally delve and like bathe and rest in so that I do have the energy to like, be a human and do the things and be messy and also like be crazy and also just come back, right? Because I think a lot of the times when we see these things, we're like, oh my God, they're so like zen or like so like, but it's not like that
Mhm.
24/7. And I think that expectation is
Mhm.
really important to just like, we're gonna put that fire out right now, right? Like there's permission, but like knowing where your resting place is, knowing where you get to like find solace. Is that what I'm looking
Yeah.
for? Knowing where like ooh that like well is.
Yeah.
That's where the juice is, and we get to like come in and out of it, and it gets to feel good, and it gets to feel edgy, and it gets to feel good again. So that
Mm.
was a disclaimer that I had to put out there. We have to keep it real.
Keep it real. I appreciate that for anyone that might think otherwise. That yeah, things are always a certain way.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you so much for having me here. I loved.
Oh, thank you, and please tell us, because I know you got the podcast and a Facebook group. Tell us
Ooh,
the things,
so
like
many.
where people find your work and.
Okay, so hear me out. I am on www.azariamenezes.com, but you can also type in www.thepussyfairy.com and then you can find me on my website. Just did that like 2 days ago and I was so happy. Why is that domain available? Because it's so.
It's for you. It's for you. Exactly. That's amazing.
Uh, yeah, you can also find me on Instagram, Azaria.Menezes, and I have, of course, a podcast called Getting Intimate. It's like about all the juicy ways you can just find back into your pleasure, all juicy like sexuality, relationship. We get like very, very, very sexy in there. So come join, come have fun. I have something juicy for you, a free little gift if you hop into my DMs, and yeah just so excited to connect with everyone.
Hey, oh, so good. So, so good. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I
uh,
look forward to like just anyone who watches this afterwards, also just to like use this as a way to like work with their own nervous system also, you know, even just through this conversation of feeling in, like leaning into what that edge would be. Like, is it in a relationship? Is it in a business? Is it in some kind of experience that one wants to have, you know, and going slow, feeling into what feels safe and what that edge is, and going just a little into that, taking a little step. I just think this wisdom is so potent for him.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, the small, it's like the pussy fairy sprinkles, right? Like you're
Yeah.
sprinkling just like a little bit, a little bit at a time. Oh,
Right. The pussy fairy dust.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I'll be posting this and everywhere to reach you. Yay.